Good morning. It's Loren Lockman from the Tanglewood Wellness Center in Costa Rica. And I've been asked a question this morning by a young man who's here from Scandinavia, spent a couple of weeks at the beach before coming to Tanglewood, and managed to severely burn himself very quickly twice over the course of the first 4 or 5 days. Yeah? 2 weeks. Okay, those 2 weeks. And so the question is a question about using sunscreen and about the suitability for exposure to tropical sun with someone who's very fair-skinned, as you are, blonde, blue-eyed, fair-skinned, not so blue, which is typical for Scandinavians and people from some other parts of the world as well. So, first of all, as you correctly stated, we are tropical animals. And the fact that you've been living in Scandinavia, your family, for generations, maybe many, many, many generations, hasn't really changed that fact. You still must maintain tropical body temperatures. But your skin has changed. Over all those generations, the skin of people whose families have been in Scandinavia for a long time tends to be very fair. Why that happens is because fair skin requires less exposure to sunlight in order to get the vitamin D it needs than does dark skin. So people who live in the tropics for generations and generations and generations tend to become darker because they're constantly exposed to sunlight, and the dark skin allows them to handle more sun exposure without damaging the skin. But it also means that they need more sun exposure to get the vitamin D that they need. And so some interesting things happen. When you come to the tropics, you need to be very, very cautious. Anybody fair-skinned needs to be very, very cautious because the sun is very intense here. You mentioned that the second time was only 30 to 60 minutes of exposure, and yet you became severely burned again on the new skin after the first layer had already peeled off. Okay? An hour in the sun here for someone who's very fair-skinned, that's a lot. It's a lot. It's too much. Does it mean that you need to use sunscreen? Well, using sunscreen is one option. And it's the option most people would recommend. It's not my recommended way. The problem is that when you put sunscreen on your body, on your skin, you are absorbing toxic nutrients, toxic substances, not nutrients, but toxic substances into your bloodstream. And it's interesting because for more than 20 years now, I've encouraged people, my coaching clients, to not use sunscreen. We'll talk about what to do instead. To not use sunscreen, saying that this stuff is toxic. Well, a few years ago, there was finally a study published that said sunscreen causes cancer. Okay? So everyone believes that exposure to the sun causes cancer. I don't think so. It's not the sunlight that causes cancer. Now, burning your skin is harmful. So if you're very fair-skinned, you need to be very cautious in the tropical sun. So what do you do if you're not going to use sunscreen? Well, you need to slowly become accustomed to the sunlight. You need to protect yourself. You need to wear a wide-brimmed hat. You might want to wear a t-shirt on the beach so you're not exposing so much of your skin, because you're not going to handle it. And I mean, I'm not fair-skinned, not nearly as fair as you are. There was a point in time when my hair was dark, almost black. My eyes are green, not blue. I've got a very different heritage. And I've always been able to handle a fair amount of sun. But I get sunburned too if I spend too much time in the sun here. Now, I can spend hours in the sun and do. But when I spend 3, 4, 5 hours body surfing, I'm going to get sunburned, unless I do exactly what I'm telling you. Wear a shirt, wear a hat. Personally, what I do, if I'm not in the ocean, I've definitely got a hat on and probably a shirt on the beach, and I'm going to stay in the shade most of the time. If I'm out on the beach playing frisbee or something, I'm going to protect myself with clothing rather than sunscreen. But It's the only time that's an issue for me is when I'm in the ocean. Because if I'm not in the water or on the beach playing frisbee, and there's a lot of sun out, I mean, obviously it's different if it's early in the morning or it's late in the evening when the sun is very low on the horizon. It's no longer very powerful because it's coming through a lot more atmosphere and is much less capable of burning you. Okay? So these are the precautions I would take. And as I've said to you guys here, you don't want to spend more than about 15 minutes at a time in the sun while you're here. Now, it's different when you're fasting because as your body's detoxifying, which it might have been doing while you were at the beach for those 2 weeks, simply because you had a different climate, your skin was able to breathe, maybe you're eating better, lighter, I don't know. But when your body's detoxifying, exposure to sunlight will make you burn faster because exposure to sunlight encourages the elimination of toxins through the skin, and that irritates the skin. So that's part of what's going on there. So anybody fair-skinned, most people need to be very careful in the tropical sun. Notice that my gardeners here, 3 full-time gardeners, you're not going to see them with their shirts off. Okay, they protect themselves. They're outside all day, and they tend to be darker, much darker than you, but they tend to protect themselves. Okay, you need to do the same thing. You might need to build up to being able to handle more exposure, a little bit, a little bit more. As your body becomes accustomed, your skin becomes accustomed to it, you can handle more of it. You're still never going to be able to spend all day in the sun without having severe issues because of the color of your skin. Now, for those people watching who are dark-skinned, you need to understand that if you live in Sweden or Norway or Finland, where you guys are from over there, you're going to have big issues because, I mean, it's hard enough for someone light-skinned, fair-skinned, to get enough sunlight in Scandinavia, even in the summertime. But someone who's very dark-skinned, think of Naomi, who just left here a week or 2 ago, there's no way she could ever get enough sunlight to meet her body's needs because she requires much more exposure than you and I do. Okay, so the darker your skin is, I think this is probably a much bigger issue for dark-skinned people living in places far from the equator. At least you can control, when you come to the tropics, you can control how much exposure you get. But if you're dark-skinned living a long way from the equator, there's nothing you can do, short of getting away, which is what I recommend everyone does, getting away to the tropics at least a couple times, at least every few months over the wintertime, and maybe over the summer, because again, as far north as you guys live, it's very hard to get enough sunlight any time of the year. Okay? So any questions about that? Is that clear?
Yeah, so can I understand you right if I interpret that you can actually custom our body to get
You can.
more?
You can, absolutely. You can. Many people do it. Many people have done it. If you've never seen, there's a great movie. I could show you guys this week if you're interested. I have a feeling not everyone would want to, but it's a great movie called Kon-Tiki. Anyone familiar with it?
Yeah,
Thor Heyerdahl, right? I mean, a bunch of Swedes, Norwegians, okay, so, excuse me, bunch of Norwegians. They're all the same, blonde-haired guys. Bunch of Norwegians who spent, how long was it? Months on a raft at sea, with lots of sun exposure. And by the time they arrived, they were dark and much better able to handle the sun than when they started. Okay. All right, so hopefully that's been helpful for you. I'll see you next time.